Religious ceremonies performed, administrative decisions made, and political situations requiring your awareness. Her position helps ensure that Thebes, always potentially rebellious, remains firmly under Kushite control. As night falls, you finally have a more private meal with your family, your Nubian wife Tebekhenamen, your children, and close relatives who serve in your administration. Here, the formality of court life relaxes somewhat. Conversations switch between the Egyptian language you use for official business and your native Nubian tongue. Your children are growing up between two cultures, educated in both Egyptian and Nubian traditions. They represent the bicultural future you envision for your dynasty. Your oldest son, Shebitku, watches and learns from your example, knowing he will likely inherit the double crown one day. Later, in the relative privacy of your chambers, you review a diplomatic message that arrived earlier from Assyria, the powerful empire expanding from Mesopotamia. Their king Sargon II sends formal greetings, but there's an undercurrent of tension. Assyrian influence is growing in the Levant, the region along the eastern Mediterranean that serves as a buffer between your realm and theirs. We must watch them carefully, you tell your foreign affairs advisor. For now, maintain cordial relations, but strengthen our presence in the eastern delta and Sinai. This nascent Assyrian threat will grow in the coming years, eventually becoming the greatest external challenge to Kushite rule in Egypt. But for now, it remains distant, something to monitor rather than fear. Before sleeping, you perform private devotions, praying to Amun-Ra and other deities for guidance and protection. The religious sincerity of the Kushite pharaohs is noteworthy. Your dynasty's legitimacy rests heavily on your role as divine intermediaries chosen by Amun to restore proper worship and cosmic order. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on your accomplishments and the challenges ahead. Your reign has brought stability and religious revival. You've cemented the legitimacy of Kushite rule through your devotion to Egyptian traditions while maintaining your distinctive Nubian identity. The remarkable Black Pharaoh dynasty that began with your uncle Paye continues to flourish under your guidance. Years pass, and eventually you too must face mortality. When death comes, you're buried with full Egyptian royal honours in a pyramid tomb at El Kuru in your Nubian homeland, continuing the tradition established by Piye. Your nephew Shebitku succeeds you, becoming the third Kushite pharaoh of Egypt's 25th dynasty. Shebitku's reign is relatively brief, but continues the patterns established by you and Paye, maintaining Kushite control over Egypt, supporting religious institutions, and carefully watching the growing Assyrian threat to the northeast. But it's his successor who will truly define the dynasty in both glory and tragedy. Now imagine that you are Taharqa, the fourth ruler of the Kushite dynasty. You ascend to the throne as a young man, energetic and ambitious. Your predecessors conquered Egypt and established Kushite rule. You intend to raise the dynasty to even greater heights. Your coronation takes place at Tanis in the Egyptian delta, signifying your control over all Egypt from its northernmost regions to the depths of Nubia in the south. The crown placed upon your head represents not just a political office, but a divine role. You are now the living embodiment of Horus, mediator between gods and humans, responsible for maintaining cosmic order. The early years of your reign fulfill your ambitions. You prove to be the greatest builder of the Kushite dynasty, commissioning temples, palaces, and monuments throughout Egypt and Nubia. Your name will be found from the delta to the fourth cataract of the Nile, inscribed on columns and statues that will stand for millennia. At Karnak, you construct a magnificent colonnade in the temple court with massive columns topped by open papyrus capitals. Though time will eventually leave only one of these columns standing, it will remain an impressive testament to your architectural ambition, towering nearly 70 feet high, covered with exquisite relief carvings. At Jebel Barkal, in your Nubian homeland, you expand the sacred complex dedicated to Amun. The temple of Mut, consort of Amun, is carved directly into the rock face of the sacred mountain. Inside, reliefs show you making offerings to the gods, legitimizing your rule through divine approval. Your building projects extend to practical works as well. You order the construction of new irrigation systems, improving agricultural productivity. Wells are dug in desert regions to support trade routes. These pragmatic improvements benefit ordinary people's lives, while also strengthening your economic and military position. One morning, as you review plans for a new temple at Kawa in Nubia, a messenger arrives with concerning news from the northeast. Divine One, he reports after prostrating himself, Assyrian forces have invaded the Levant in greater numbers than ever before. Several city-states that pay tribute to Egypt have appealed for our protection. This is the moment when external politics will begin to dominate your reign. The Assyrian Empire, based in Mesopotamia, has been expanding westward for decades. Now, under their king Esarhaddon, they present a direct threat to Egyptian interests and ultimately to Egypt itself. You call your military commanders and advisors for an emergency council. Maps are spread before you, showing the Levantine coastal regions and the advancing Assyrian positions. For centuries, Egypt has considered this area part of its sphere of influence, a buffer protecting its northeastern frontier. We must support our vassals, you declare after hearing various opinions. Prepare the army to march eastward. This decision sets in motion events that will define the latter part of your reign. The initial engagement with Assyrian forces goes well. Your army successfully pushes them back, protecting Egyptian allied cities in the Levant. You commission victory monuments celebrating this success, not realizing it will prove temporary. The demands of international politics now occupy much of your time. You forge alliances with various powers who also fear Assyrian expansion. One of your most significant partnerships is with King Hezekiah of Judah, who resists Assyrian domination. This alliance enters religious texts that will still be read thousands of years later. The Hebrew Bible records how Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, Taharka, came to support Judah against the Assyrian king Sennacherib during his siege of Jerusalem. The biblical account describes how the Assyrian army mysteriously withdrew after your intervention, a significant diplomatic and military achievement for your dynasty. Despite these initial successes, the Assyrian threat continues to grow. Their technological and military advantages, iron weapons, advanced siege equipment, and overwhelming numbers make them a formidable enemy. Your kingdoms of Egypt and Kush, though wealthy and sophisticated, struggle to match their military innovations. In 671 BCE, disaster strikes. Esarhaddon launches a massive invasion of Egypt itself. Your forces fight valiantly but are overwhelmed by the Assyrian war machine. Memphis falls and you are forced to retreat southward to Thebes. For the first time, the Kushite control of Egypt is seriously threatened. The following months are among the most challenging of your reign. From Thebes, you reorganize your forces and plan a counterattack. When news arrives that Esarhaddon has withdrawn the bulk of his army to deal with matters elsewhere, you seize the opportunity. A rapid advance northward allows you to recapture Memphis and restore Kushite control over much of Egypt. This victory proves short-lived. In 669 BCE, Esarhaddon marches on Egypt again. Though he dies during the campaign, his son Ashurbanipal continues the invasion. The Assyrian forces are overwhelming, and this time they push beyond Memphis to Thebes itself. The capture and plundering of Thebes in 663 BCE marks a traumatic moment in Egyptian history. This great religious centre, which had stood inviolate for centuries, is now in foreign hands. The Assyrians loot its temples and palaces, carrying away countless treasures, including 2 massive obelisks that will be transported all the way to Nineveh. you are forced to retreat to your Nubian homeland, effectively ending Kushite control of Egypt. After nearly a century of rule, the 25th dynasty's dominion over the two lands comes to an end. Yet even in this defeat, you maintain your royal dignity and religious authority. In Napata and throughout Nubia, you are still Pharaoh, still the divine king chosen by Amun. The final years of your reign focus on strengthening your Nubian kingdom and preserving what remains of your dynasty's legacy. You continue building projects in Nubia, particularly at Nuri, where you establish a new royal cemetery. Your pyramid there, larger than those of your predecessors, will become your final resting place. Despite the loss of Egypt, you're remembered as one of the greatest kings of the 25th dynasty. Your architectural achievements, military campaigns, and cultural patronage leave an indelible mark on both Egyptian and Nubian history. The religious revival you and your predecessors championed influences Egyptian culture long after Kushite political control ends. When death finally comes, you're buried with appropriate ceremony in your pyramid at Nuri. Your successor Tantamani will make one last attempt to restore Kushite control in Egypt, briefly recapturing Memphis before being permanently driven back by the Assyrians and their Egyptian allies. The 25th dynasty's rule over Egypt has ended, but its legacy endures. For nearly a century, Nubian kings ruled as pharaohs, bringing stability, religious revival, and cultural flourishing after a period of fragmentation. They governed not as foreign occupiers, but as legitimate pharaohs, accepted within the ancient Egyptian tradition. The distinctive artistic style developed during your dynasty, blending Egyptian and Nubian elements, continues to influence creative expression in both regions. The religious texts you preserved, particularly the Memphite theology on the Shabaka stone, ensure that ancient wisdom survives for future generations, and the pyramids you built in Nubia stand as enduring monuments to your dynasty's power and cultural sophistication. Perhaps most importantly, your dynasty demonstrates that the relationship between Egypt and Nubia was never simply one of Egyptian dominance. These two ancient African civilizations influenced each other profoundly over thousands of years, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as partners. And during your remarkable era, with Nubians as Egypt's divinely appointed rulers. Far from the stereotype of a peripheral civilization existing in Egypt's shadow, your Kushite kingdom reveals itself as a sophisticated power with its own distinct traditions, capable of not only resisting Egyptian influence, but of conquering and ruling Egypt itself. The story of the Black Pharaohs stands as a powerful reminder of Africa's complex history and the remarkable civilizations it produced long before European colonization. As the stars shine over your pyramid tomb at Nuri, your legacy lives on, in monuments that still stand, in texts still studied, and in the permanent reframing of the relationship between two of Africa's greatest ancient civilizations. Now that we've explored the grand political narratives of the Nubian pharaohs, let's step away from the royal palaces and battlefields to discover what life was like for ordinary people living under the rule of the Black Pharaohs. After all, empires aren't just made of kings and conquests. They're built on the daily lives, labours, and beliefs of thousands of individuals whose names rarely appear in historical records. Imagine you're no longer a pharaoh, but instead an ordinary resident of the Kushite kingdom during the height of the 25th dynasty. The sun rises over your mud brick home in a small village along the Nile, somewhere between the 3rd and 4th cataracts in what is now northern Sudan. This is the heartland of Kush, the powerful African kingdom that sent its rulers north to conquer Egypt. Your home is simple but comfortable, built of sun-dried mud bricks that keep the interior surprisingly cool despite the scorching heat outside. The walls are thick with small windows placed high to create air circulation while minimizing the direct sunlight. The flat roof, accessible by a ladder, serves as an outdoor sleeping area during the hottest months when the interior becomes too warm at night. Inside, the floor is packed earth, swept clean each morning. Reed mats provide seating during the day and bedding at night. Storage jars contain your household's precious grain supply, carefully protected from mice and insects. Clay oil lamps provide light after sunset, though most activities follow the natural rhythm of daylight. As the first rays of sun filter through your doorway, you rise to begin your day. If you're a farmer, as most people in this society are, your schedule is dictated by the seasons and the river. During the inundation, when the Nile floods and covers your fields, you might work on maintaining irrigation channels or on other tasks like repairing tools and buildings. After the waters recede, leaving behind fertile silt, the planting begins, back-breaking work of preparing the soil and sowing seeds. The Nubian agricultural system relies on both the natural flooding of the Nile and increasingly sophisticated irrigation methods. The shaduf, a simple but effective device with a counterweight on one end of a pole and a bucket on the other, allows you to lift water from the river to irrigate fields beyond the natural flood zone. More complex water wheel systems, powered by oxen, expand the arable land even further. Your main crops include sorghum and millet, ancient indigenous grains perfectly adapted to the African climate. These hardy plants form the foundation of the Nubian diet. You also grow barley for making beer, various vegetables like onions and cucumbers, and perhaps some fruit trees if you're fortunate enough to have a garden plot. If you're a woman in this household, your morning begins with food preparation, using a stone grinding pallet, a technology unchanged for thousands of years. You grind sorghum or millet into flour for the day's bread. This is physically demanding work, requiring strength and endurance as you push the grinding stone back and forth across the base stone for up to an hour to produce enough flour for your family. The bread you make isn't the raised loaves familiar to Egyptians, but flatter, denser cakes cooked on a clay griddle over an open fire. Sometimes you might add honey or dates for special occasions, but most days it's simply the plain staple that provides most of your family's calories. While the main meal is being prepared, children are sent to collect water from the Nile or from community wells. Water carriers balanced on heads are a common sight, with young girls learning this skill from an early age. The water not only serves for drinking and cooking, but also for the ritual washing that precedes prayers in this increasingly Amun-centered religious culture. If your family has animals, perhaps a few goats, sheep or chickens, they need tending as well. Livestock represents wealth and food security in this agricultural society. Cattle are especially prized, though typically only the more affluent families own them. For most ordinary households, smaller animals provide occasional meat, milk and eggs to supplement the grain-based diet. By mid-morning, the day's heat begins to build. If you're working in the fields, you've already been labouring for several hours, perhaps alongside neighbours in a communal work arrangement. Agricultural labour is often organised collectively, with families helping each other during critical planting and harvesting times. The social structure of Nubian villages maintains some egalitarian principles despite the highly stratified nature of the broader kingdom. Village elders make many local decisions through consensus, though all ultimately answer to officials appointed by the pharaoh's administration. Land ownership follows complex patterns, with some plots held communally and others allocated to specific families. If you're not a farmer, you might be engaged in one of the many specialised crafts essential to Nubian society. Pottery production is particularly significant. Nubian ceramics are not just functional items, but works of art, with distinctive decorative patterns that archaeologists can still identify thousands of years later. The characteristic black-topped redware created through a special firing technique is especially valued. Other crucial crafts include weaving, basketry, leatherworking, and metallurgy. Goldworking is particularly important in the Kushite kingdom, which controls major gold-producing regions. The precious metal isn't just for royal treasuries. It appears in jewellery worn by many levels of society, though the quantity and quality vary dramatically by social status. By midday, the sun is merciless. Work often pauses during these hottest hours, with families retreating to shade for the main meal of the day. This typically consists of bread, beer, and perhaps a vegetable stew flavoured with locally grown herbs and spices. Meat is reserved for special occasions for most ordinary families. The beer you drink bears little resemblance to modern versions. It's thick, nutritious, and relatively low in alcohol, more of a staple food than an intoxicant. Everyone drinks it, including children, as it's often safer than water and provides essential calories and nutrients. After the midday meal and rest, work resumes in the slightly cooler late afternoon hours. For children, this might include formal education if you're from a privileged family connected to the temple or administrative systems. The Kushite elite are literate in both Egyptian hieroglyphics and the indigenous Meroitic script, though the latter develops more fully after the 25th dynasty period. For most children, however, education is practical rather than literary, learning the skills they'll need as adults by working alongside parents and other adults. Boys typically follow their father's occupations, while girls learn domestic skills and crafts from their mothers and other female relatives. As the workday winds down, community life becomes more prominent. The village marketplace might come alive in the cooler evening hours, with people trading goods, exchanging news, and socialising. If you have items to trade, perhaps excess produce from your garden or crafts you've made, you'll barter for things your household needs. While most day-to-day exchange happens through barter, the Kushite kingdom does use certain standardized values for larger transactions. Gold rings of specific weight serve as a form of currency among merchants and for tax payments to royal officials. Speaking of taxes, the pharaoh's presence is felt even in remote villages through the regular collection of a portion of your harvest or production. Royal officials maintain detailed records of what each community owes, with local headmen responsible for ensuring proper payment. These taxes support the court, temples, military, and the massive building projects that characterize the 25th dynasty. If you're living during the height of Kushite power when they controlled Egypt, you might occasionally see these resources returning to your community in the form of infrastructure improvements, irrigation systems, grain storage facilities, and temples. The Kushite pharaohs, particularly Taharqa, were known for practical public works that benefited ordinary people alongside their more monumental construction projects. As evening approaches, religious observances become part of many households' routines. While the elaborate ceremonies of the great temples are conducted by professional priests, family-level worship takes place in homes and local shrines. Small figurines representing deities, Amun-Ra, Isis, Hathor, and others from the Egyptian pantheon, along with indigenous Nubian gods like Apedamak, the lion-headed warrior god, might occupy a special niche in your home. The religious practice of ordinary Nubians during this period represents a fascinating synthesis. While the royal ideology centers heavily on Amun-Ra, everyday spirituality incorporates a broader range of deities and practices. Some elements date back to the indigenous A group and C group cultures of prehistoric Nubia, while others reflect Egyptian influence from centuries of cultural exchange. Protective amulets are commonly worn, especially by children and pregnant women thought to be particularly vulnerable to spiritual dangers. These might be simple clay or stone pendants inscribed with divine symbols, or more elaborate pieces made of faience, a ceramic material with a glassy surface if your family has means. After the evening meal, another round of bread with perhaps some dried fish, lentils, or vegetables, families gather to socialize. Storytelling is an important tradition, with elders passing down historical and mythological narratives that reinforce cultural identity and values. These stories often feature the exploits of kings and gods, but also trickster tales and moral fables that provide entertainment and instruction. Music and dance form another essential aspect of community life. Simple instruments, drums made of pottery or wood covered with animal skin, reed flutes, rattles, and stringed instruments similar to small harps, accompany songs and dances for both ceremonial and recreational purposes. Public performances might mark festivals, weddings, or other significant community events. As the stars appear in the clear desert sky, most village activities wind down. Without artificial lighting, sleep patterns generally follow the natural cycle of daylight. During the hottest seasons, many people sleep on rooftops to catch evening breezes, with entire families spreading reed mats across the flat mud brick surfaces. This cycle of daily life continues with seasonal variations. The agricultural calendar dictates much of the year's rhythm, with intense periods of activity during planting and harvest interspersed with somewhat less demanding seasons. Religious festivals mark important transitions, the beginning of the Nile flood, the harvest, and astronomical events like solstices. If you're living in one of the larger urban centres like Napata rather than a rural village, your daily experience differs significantly. Cities serve as administrative, religious and commercial hubs with more specialised occupations and greater social stratification. Urban dwellers might work as scribes in the royal administration, recording tax collections, inventorying temple property, or drafting correspondence. Others serve as priests in the elaborate temple complexes that form the spiritual centres of Kushite society. Craftspeople in cities often produce more specialised luxury goods for the elite: fine jewellery, decorated weapons, cosmetic items, and elaborate furnishings. The social hierarchy becomes more visible in urban settings. While rural villages maintain certain egalitarian traditions, cities display clear distinctions between the royal court, nobility, priests, merchants, artisans, and labourers. These distinctions manifest in housing, clothing, diet, and access to resources. At the apex of this hierarchy stands the royal court. Life in the palace operates according to elaborate protocols that regulate everything from how one approaches the pharaoh to who may speak in royal councils. The king's daily routine involves numerous ceremonies and religious rituals alongside the practical business of governance. High officials and nobles occupy the next tier, overseeing various aspects of the kingdom's administration. Many hold hereditary positions passed from father to son, creating powerful families whose fortunes are tied to royal favour. Their residences, substantial compounds with multiple rooms around central courtyards, reflect their status, as do their fine linen garments and gold jewellery. Priests constitute another elite group, especially those serving in the main temples dedicated to Amun-Ra. Temple complexes function almost as cities within cities, with their own economies, workshops, and administrative systems. Some priests serve temporarily on a rotating basis, while others hold permanent positions requiring specialized knowledge of rituals and texts. Merchants and skilled artisans form a kind of middle class, particularly in cities along major trade routes. International trade brings valuable goods from throughout Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Near East. Incense from Punt, Somalia, timber from Lebanon, copper from Sinai, exotic animals, and ivory from Central Africa. Controlling this trade brings wealth and influence to certain families and guilds. For urban labourers, construction workers, porters, domestic servants, and others providing essential services, life is more challenging. While not enslaved, though slavery does exist in the Kushite kingdom primarily for captured prisoners of war and their descendants, their economic security depends entirely on continued employment, making them vulnerable to illness or injury. Housing reflects these social distinctions. Elite residences feature multiple rooms around courtyards with plastered and painted walls, decorative elements, and separate spaces for different functions. Middle-class homes are smaller but still subdivided for specialized uses. The urban poor might occupy single-room dwellings in densely packed neighborhoods, sometimes with extended families sharing limited space. Clothing similarly signals social position. The elite wear fine linen garments, often pleated and adorned with colourful borders. Gold jewellery, including heavy collars and bracelets, completes their outfits. Ordinary people make do with simpler linen or cotton clothing, with more modest adornments of beads, faience, or copper. Children often go naked or nearly so until puberty, a practical adaptation to the hot climate. Personal appearance receives careful attention across all social classes. Nubian hairstyles are elaborate and distinctive, with braided patterns that can indicate age, status, and regional identity. Both men and women use oils to protect their skin from the harsh sun, and cosmetics for both practical protection and aesthetic enhancement. Kohl, a dark mineral pigment, lines the eyes, helping to reduce glare and prevent eye infections while also being decoratively pleasing. For women in Kushite society, roles vary by social class. Elite women may have considerable influence, particularly those connected to the royal family or holding religious offices. The institution of the god's wife of Amun, controlled by Kushite princesses during the 25th dynasty, represents one of the highest status positions available to women in the ancient world, with both religious authority and substantial political power. Ordinary women manage households, contribute to agricultural labour, and often engage in specialised crafts like pottery and textile production. Some evidence suggests Nubian society granted women more autonomy than contemporary Egyptian culture, particularly in legal matters like property ownership. Female figures in Kushite art appear in a wider variety of active roles than their Egyptian counterparts. Health and medicine reflect a combination of practical knowledge and religious beliefs. Some herbal remedies used by Nubian healers contain genuinely effective compounds, while other treatments rely more on spiritual intervention. Life expectancy is short by modern standards, perhaps 30-40 years on average, with high infant mortality and significant risks associated with childbirth for women. Now imagine the changes that occur when the Kushite pharaohs lose control of Egypt after the Assyrian invasions. The kingdom contracts to its Nubian heartland, with the royal court permanently established at Napata. While this represents a political setback, in many ways daily life continues, much as before for ordinary people in the Nubian territories. The loss of Egyptian resources does require adjustments. Without access to certain Egyptian luxury goods, local alternatives develop. The architecture of temples and palaces evolves to incorporate more indigenous elements alongside the Egyptian-influenced styles that dominated during the 25th dynasty. Religion also undergoes subtle transformations. While Amun-Ra remains the principal deity, indigenous Nubian gods like Apedimak gain prominence. Temples built after the retreat from Egypt feature these distinctly Nubian deities more prominently, though always within a framework heavily influenced by Egyptian religious concepts. The kingdom's centre of gravity begins to shift southward. Eventually, around 300 BCE, the royal capital moves from Napata to Meroe, further south along the Nile. This marks the transition from what scholars call the Napatan period to the Meroitic period of Kushite history. Meroe develops as a major iron-producing centre, with numerous furnaces processing ore from nearby sources. This technological specialisation provides economic strength that helps the kingdom maintain its independence despite the loss of Egypt. The distinctive steep-sided Nubian pyramids continue to be built for rulers and elites, now at sites near Meroe rather than El Kuru or Nuri. The Meroitic period sees the full development of the indigenous writing system, the Meroitic script. While clearly inspired by Egyptian hieroglyphics, it represents the Kushite language, which is entirely different from Egyptian. Official inscriptions now appear in both hieroglyphics and Meroitic, reflecting the kingdom's dual cultural heritage. Trade routes shift somewhat, with greater emphasis on connections to Central Africa and the Red Sea rather than the Mediterranean. Exotic goods still flow through the kingdom, however, including items from as far away as India and China that arrive via Red Sea ports and overland routes. Throughout these transitions, certain distinctive aspects of Kushite culture persist. The famous Nubian archers maintain their reputation for excellence, serving as the military backbone of the kingdom. Pottery styles continue to display the characteristic decorative patterns that identify them as distinctly Nubian. Religious syncretism, the blending of Egyptian and indigenous traditions, remains a defining cultural feature. Perhaps most significantly, the memory of the 25th dynasty, when Kushite kings ruled as pharaohs of Egypt, continues to provide ideological legitimacy for the royal line. Even centuries after the retreat from Egypt, Kushite rulers portray themselves with the double crown and other symbols of Egyptian kingship, maintaining the claim to be rightful heirs to this ancient tradition. For ordinary people, these grand political narratives might seem distant from daily concerns of agriculture, family, and local community, yet the cultural pride associated with the Black Pharaoh period likely permeates society at all levels, reinforcing a sense of Kushite identity and historical importance that helps sustain the kingdom through various challenges. This remarkable civilization continues for centuries after the 25th dynasty ends, with the kingdom of Kush remaining independent until around the 4th century CE. Eventually, changing trade patterns, resource depletion, and pressure from the rising kingdom of Aksum in Ethiopia contribute to its decline. But the legacy of Kush, and particularly the extraordinary period when Nubian kings ruled as Egypt's 25th dynasty, endures far beyond the kingdom's political existence. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal the sophistication of this African civilization, challenging earlier historical narratives that marginalized Nubia's role or portrayed it merely as a cultural appendage to Egypt. The story of the Black Pharaohs and the kingdom they ruled stands as a powerful reminder of Africa's complex pre-colonial history, a story of sophisticated states with monumental architecture, distinctive artistic traditions, complex religious systems, and far-reaching trade networks. Far from being peripheral to world history, Nubia and its remarkable 25th dynasty represent a central chapter in the development of ancient civilization. As our journey through the world of the Nubian Black Pharaohs draws to a close, let's explore how this remarkable chapter of history was almost forgotten, then rediscovered, and what it means for our understanding of ancient Africa and world history today. The story of how the Black Pharaohs' legacy survived through millennia is perhaps as fascinating as their reign itself. Imagine now that you're standing in the scorching desert of northern Sudan. The year is 1842, and you're a European explorer named Carl Richard Lepsius. The ruins before you are breathtaking. Dozens of steep-sided pyramids rising from the sand, temples with columns covered in hieroglyphics, and statues of forgotten kings. Yet almost nobody in Europe or America knows these monuments exist. For centuries, Western understanding of ancient history focused almost exclusively on Greece, Rome, and Egypt, largely ignoring the sophisticated civilizations that flourished in Nubia. When Nubia was mentioned at all, it was usually portrayed as a primitive cultural backwater, significant only as Egypt's source of gold and slaves. This narrative was deeply flawed, as Lepsius and other early archaeologists were beginning to discover. The pyramids they found at El Kuru, Nuri, and Meroe were not poor imitations of Egyptian monuments, but expressions of a distinct and sophisticated civilization with its own traditions and achievements. The inscriptions they documented revealed kings and queens who had not only ruled Nubia but had conquered and governed Egypt itself as the 25th dynasty. Why had this history been so thoroughly forgotten in Western accounts? Part of the answer lies in ancient politics. When the Assyrians drove the Kushite rulers from Egypt, they attempted to erase evidence of the 25th dynasty, destroying statues and monuments. Later, Egyptian pharaohs of the 26th dynasty continued this process, deliberately damaging or usurping Kushite monuments and inscriptions. But a deeper reason relates to modern prejudices. When European scholars began systematically studying ancient Egypt in the 18th and 19th centuries, many were uncomfortable with evidence of sophisticated black African civilizations that had conquered and ruled Egypt. Such findings contradicted the racial theories used to justify European colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. As one prominent 19th century scholar put it when confronted with evidence of Nubia's achievements, "I cannot recognize in the people portrayed the Negro type. The so-called Ethiopian dynasty was not of Negro but Hamitic origin." This remarkable statement reveals how deeply racial prejudice influenced supposedly objective historical analysis, leading scholars to either ignore Nubian achievements or attribute them to supposedly non-African influences. Fortunately, archaeological evidence is persistent. Throughout the 20th century, continued excavations revealed more and more of Nubia's remarkable history. The construction of the Aswan High Dam in the 1960s, which would flood many ancient Nubian sites under the waters of Lake Nasser, prompted emergency archaeological work that dramatically expanded knowledge of the region's past. Today, museums around the world display stunning artifacts that testify to Nubia's sophistication. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston holds one of the largest collections of Nubian artifacts outside Africa, including magnificent jewellery, sculpture, and pottery from the 25th dynasty period. The British Museum houses the famous Shabaka stone with its crucial theological text. In Khartoum, the National Museum of Sudan showcases spectacular finds from royal tombs and temples. But perhaps the most powerful testimony to the Kushite achievement remains the monuments they left behind. Despite millennia of weathering, looting, and deliberate destruction, the pyramids of El Kuru, Nuri, and Meroe still stand in the Sudanese desert. The columns erected by Tahaka still reach toward the sky at Karnak. The temple complexes at Jebel Barkal still inspire awe at the foot of the sacred mountain. These physical remnants tell us much about the Kushite kingdom and its 25th dynasty of black pharaohs. Let's explore what makes their legacy so significant for our understanding of ancient history and African civilization. First, the 25th dynasty represents a unique moment when the traditional power dynamic between Egypt and Nubia was reversed. For most of their shared history, Egypt had been the dominant power, sometimes ruling Nubian territories as a colonial overlord. The rise of Kushite kings who conquered and ruled Egypt as pharaohs demonstrates that African political power was not static but fluid, with different centers of influence rising and falling over time. Second, the Kushite period demonstrates sophisticated cultural exchange rather than simple domination. The Nubian pharaohs didn't attempt to erase Egyptian culture and replace it with their own. Instead, they portrayed themselves as champions of traditional Egyptian religious practices, restoring temples and reviving ancient rituals. They adopted elements of Egyptian royal iconography while maintaining distinctive Nubian features in their self-representation. This cultural synthesis is particularly evident in art and architecture. Kushite royal statuary combines Egyptian poses and symbolism with distinctively Nubian features, broader faces, fuller lips, and different crown types. Temple architecture incorporates Egyptian elements like pylons and hypo-style halls, but with proportions and decorative details that mark them as Kushite creations. The ram-headed sphinxes that line the approaches to Kushite temples represent Amun, the deity central to both Egyptian and Nubian religion, but their stocky proportions and distinctive decorative elements are uniquely Nubian. This wasn't simple imitation, but creative adaptation, blending traditions to create something new. Third, the religious policies of the 25th dynasty had lasting impacts on Egyptian theology. The Kushite pharaohs' emphasis on traditional worship, particularly their focus on Amun and the Theban theological system, helped preserve ancient religious texts and practices that might otherwise have been lost during Egypt's politically fragmented Third Intermediate period. The famous Shabaka stone, commissioned by the second Kushite pharaoh, preserves the only known copy of the Memphite theology, a crucial text for understanding ancient Egyptian conceptions of creation. By having this text carved in stone, Shabaka ensured its survival for over 2,500 years, providing modern scholars with invaluable insights into Egyptian religious thought. Fourth, the practical achievements of the Kushite rulers, particularly Taharqa, improved daily life for ordinary people. Beyond monumental buildings, they constructed and repaired irrigation systems, dug wells, and built grain storage facilities. These practical works increased agricultural productivity and improved water management, directly benefiting communities throughout Egypt and Nubia. Fifth, the Kushite period saw important technological innovations, particularly in metallurgy, while the 25th dynasty itself preceded the height of Nubian iron production, which flourished later at Meroe. It laid the groundwork for these developments by strengthening the kingdom's economic and political foundations. The later Kushite mastery of ironworking, with hundreds of smelting furnaces producing tools and weapons, represents one of Africa's most significant technological achievements. Sixth, the international relations of the 25th dynasty demonstrate Nubia's integration into a broader world system. Diplomatic and military interactions with Assyria, Judah, and other Near Eastern powers show that Kush was a recognized player on the international stage, engaging in the complex politics of the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. The biblical mention of Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia, Taharqa, coming to Judah's aid against Assyria isn't just a religious reference, but evidence of real political and military alliances that shaped the history of the entire region. Far from being isolated, Nubia under the 25th dynasty was connected to a vast network of trade, diplomacy, and sometimes conflict that spanned from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean and deep into Africa. Seventh, and perhaps most fundamentally, the story of the Black Pharaohs forces us to reconsider traditional narratives about ancient Africa, the sophisticated state organization, monumental architecture, complex religious institutions, and international diplomacy of Kushite Nubia contradict colonial-era characterizations of pre-colonial Africa as lacking significant political development or cultural achievement. The recognition of Nubia's achievements doesn't depend on comparing it to Egypt or other non-African civilizations. Kush was remarkable on its own terms, with a history spanning over 2,000 years. Longer than Rome's empire existed, its distinctive artistic traditions, architectural innovations, and technological developments represent major contributions to human cultural heritage. What makes the 25th dynasty particularly significant is how it embodies the complex relationship between two of Africa's greatest ancient civilizations. Rather than seeing Egypt and Nubia as entirely separate entities or portraying Nubia as merely peripheral to Egypt, the period of Kushite rule demonstrates their deep interconnection and mutual influence. So what happened to this remarkable kingdom after the end of the 25th dynasty? Though driven from Egypt by the Assyrians around 656 BCE, the kingdom of Kush continued to flourish in its Nubian homeland for nearly a millennium more. The royal capital eventually shifted from Napata to Meroe, further south along the Nile, where iron production became a major economic activity. During this Meroitic period, the kingdom maintained many cultural elements established during the 25th dynasty: pyramid burials for rulers, worship of Amun alongside indigenous deities like the lion god Apedamak, and an artistic tradition that blended Egyptian and Nubian elements. The Meroitic script, derived from Egyptian hieroglyphics but representing the Kushite language, came into full use during this period. Kushite queens holding the title Candace, often rendered as Candace in Greek and Roman sources, gained particular prominence during the later Meroitic period. These powerful women sometimes ruled independently rather than as consorts, leading armies and conducting diplomacy with other powers. One such queen famously negotiated with Augustus Caesar's representatives around 21 BCE, securing favourable terms after military confrontations. The kingdom finally declined in the 4th century CE, weakened by changing trade patterns, environmental degradation from intensive iron production, and pressure from the rising kingdom of Aksum in what is now Ethiopia. Yet even after Kush's political collapse, its cultural influence persisted in the successor Christian kingdoms that emerged in Nubia, which maintained distinctive artistic traditions and architecture influenced by their Kushite heritage. When we look at the broader legacy of the Nubian 25th dynasty and the Kushite civilization it represented, several insights emerge that remain relevant today. First, the story of the Black Pharaohs reminds us that history is rarely simple or linear. Power shifts, cultures blend, and innovations emerge from unexpected places. The traditional narrative of Egypt as the dominant civilization and Nubia as its peripheral neighbour overlooks the complex reality of their relationship, which included periods of Nubian dominance and significant Nubian contributions to shared cultural developments. Second, the rediscovery of Nubia's achievements demonstrates how historical narratives can be shaped by modern prejudices and political agendas. The minimization of Kushite contributions in earlier Western scholarship wasn't accidental, but reflected colonial-era racial theories that were uncomfortable with evidence of sophisticated African civilizations. Recognizing these biases helps us approach historical questions with greater awareness of our own potential blind spots. Third, the cultural synthesis practiced by the Kushite pharaohs offers a model of engagement that neither rejects outside influences nor abandons indigenous traditions. The 25th dynasty rulers adopted elements of Egyptian culture that served their purposes while maintaining distinctly Nubian features in their self-representation and governance. This selective adaptation allowed them to function effectively within Egyptian contexts while preserving their own cultural identity. Fourth, the 25th dynasty's emphasis on restoration and preservation, rebuilding temples, documenting ancient texts, reviving traditional practices, demonstrates an awareness of history's value that resonates with modern concerns about cultural heritage. By consciously positioning themselves as protectors of tradition, the Nubian pharaohs not only legitimized their rule, but also ensured the transmission of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Fifth, the practical achievements of rulers like Taharqa remind us that even in societies where kings claimed divine status, effective governance often depended on addressing ordinary people's material needs. The irrigation works, wells, and grain storage facilities constructed during the 25th dynasty probably did more to secure popular support than grand theological claims or monumental architecture. Finally, the story of the Black Pharaohs contributes to a more accurate and nuanced understanding of Africa's pre-colonial past. Rather than treating the continent as a blank space awaiting European discovery or assuming that significant developments must have come from outside, recognition of Nubia's achievements helps restore agency and complexity to African historical narratives. The pyramids rising from the Sudanese desert, the colossal statues of Kushite kings, the temples with their ram-headed sphinxes. These aren't curiosities or footnotes to Egyptian history, but monuments to one of the world's great ancient civilizations. The fact that this history was obscured for so long says more about modern prejudices than about Nubia's actual significance. Today, archaeological work continues in Sudan, with new discoveries regularly expanding our understanding of Kushite civilization. Advanced techniques like satellite imaging, geophysical surveys, and DNA analysis are providing fresh insights into questions that have puzzled researchers for generations. Each finding adds detail to the picture of this remarkable African kingdom and its dynasty of black pharaohs. For the people of modern Sudan, this ancient heritage represents an important connection to their past. Despite political difficulties that have sometimes complicated archaeological work and site preservation, many Sudanese take immense pride in their country's role as the homeland of this sophisticated civilization. The pyramids of Meroe appear on Sudanese currency and in tourist promotions, symbols of national identity and historical achievement. In Egypt too, there's growing recognition of the Kushite contribution to the country's long history. The 25th dynasty is now properly included in exhibitions and educational materials about Egypt's pharaonic past, acknowledged as a period of religious revival and cultural flourishing rather than dismissed as a foreign interruption. For the broader world, the story of the Black Pharaohs offers an important correction to simplified narratives about ancient history. It demonstrates Africa's central role in early civilization, reveals the complexity of cross-cultural interactions in the ancient world, and provides a reminder that power and influence have never been confined to a single region or people. As we conclude our journey through the world of the Nubian Black Pharaohs, perhaps the most important takeaway is simply appreciation for human creativity and resilience across time and space. The kings and queens of Kush, the artists who carved their statues, the priests who maintained their temples, the engineers who built their pyramids, and the ordinary people who lived under their rule, all were part of a vibrant civilization that made lasting contributions to human heritage. When you see images of the pyramids at Meroe, the ram-headed sphinxes of Jebel Barkal, or the face of Taharqa on a museum statue, remember that you're looking at more than just interesting artifacts. You're seeing the legacy of rulers who reframed the relationship between two great African civilizations, who preserved ancient wisdom while creating new cultural syntheses, and who built monuments that have withstood the test of time. The story of the Black Pharaohs reminds us that history's full tapestry includes many threads that conventional narratives have often overlooked. By recovering and appreciating these overlooked stories, we gain a richer, more accurate understanding of our shared human past. As the stars shine over the ancient pyramids of Nuri and El Kuru, where the Nubian pharaohs lie in their eternal rest, their legacy continues to inspire new generations of scholars, artists, and ordinary people fascinated by this remarkable chapter in Africa's long and complex history. The Black Pharaohs may have ruled nearly 3,000 years ago, but their achievements and the questions they raise about power, identity, and cultural exchange remain deeply relevant today. And perhaps that's the greatest testament to their significance, not just that they ruled both Egypt and Nubia for a century, not just that they built monuments that still stand, but that their story continues to challenge us to think more deeply and inclusively about the ancient world and the diverse civilizations that shaped it. As you drift towards sleep, imagine once more the procession of a Nubian pharaoh through the grand temple at Karnak, the sun glinting off golden regalia, the priests chanting ancient prayers, the crowds watching in awe. This wasn't an aberration in history, but part of its rich tapestry. A moment when the traditional narrative shifted, when the conquered became conquerors, when the cultural current flowed southward as well as north. In that image lies a powerful reminder that history's path is never straight or simple, that power shifts in unexpected ways, and that human achievement knows no geographical or racial boundaries. The story of the Black Pharaohs, long obscured, has re-emerged to take its rightful place in our understanding of the ancient world, a testament to Africa's central role in the development of human civilization.